Hello, and welcome to my legislative report. I'm State Representative John Payne of the 106th District in Dauphin County. Occasionally, our state capitol plays host to a foreign visitor who comes to Pennsylvania and the United States to learn more about how we live and how we govern ourselves. It's a good opportunity to showcase the state and also demonstrate in a hands-on way how people can thrive under a system that values democracy and individual liberty. Recently, a delegation of social and political leaders from China made a stop in Harrisburg. I was pleased to be able to speak with them about my job as a state representative. On this month's program, I would like to share some of the highlights of that visit. All the House members are the same. We all have the same amount of population, about 60 to 65,000 people. Some have more communities or more school districts, some have less. It's all geared on the population, not the square miles. When we're in session, we're here in the House. It's about 75 to 85 days out of the year. We're actually in the House on a session day voting on the House floor. The other times there could be committee hearings. As the room we're in right now, we hold committee hearings in. Or right above us, they're holding the Appropriations Committee hearings for the budget. We're looking at adopting our budget for the current year, and they're going line by line holding appropriations hearing upstairs. With the economy right now in the United States not being good, we're looking at cuts. We're looking at trying to save money and make some cuts to the budget. So all the people are coming in pretty much asking not to cut their line item. It's okay to cut their line item, don't cut my line item. And we hear the same thing from the people who come into our offices. When we're not here in Harrisburg, I'm in Hershey. I have an office in Hershey. And I actually, my job is actually probably 80% of the job is out of the district, out of the Hershey office. And when you're in there, I have days that I see people every half an hour. Somebody else is coming into the office to talk to me. I will go out and hold meetings with the local elected officials, the little towns or boroughs. I'll meet with them. I'll meet with constituents, and I meet with business people. And then when the weather's nice, when it warms up, I try to actually go out and knock on doors of the homes, introduce myself, and I knock on businesses. I've actually, one of the things I'm most proud of is knocking on a business person, walking in, introducing myself, and the gentleman owns a bowling alley in my district and said, I've been here for 28 years, I've never seen an elected official. That makes me feel good that I can go in and introduce myself. I like to think of the people that I represent as my customers, not as voters, because they only vote 2 days a year. We vote in our primary in the spring and the general election in November. The rest of the time, they're my customers. If I do a good job, they're going to keep me in office. If I don't do a good job, they're going to get rid of me. That's pretty how simple it is. Now, I worked at the chocolate factory for almost 30 years before I ran for public office. So I'd like to think I bring the private business sense with me to this job. The other thing that I wanted to make sure I told you is the House and the Senate both have committees. They both listen to the bills before they get to the House or Senate floor. Those bills are kind of aired out, if you will. We hear the goods and bads about every piece of legislation. And then when it leaves that chamber, the House chamber or the Senate chamber, the bill, if it is in the House, goes to the Senate, and a Senate bill would come over to the House. And then we will, again, we'll listen to the values of that bill before it's sent to the governor. A bill has to pass both chambers, the House and the Senate, to get to the governor. The governor then can either pass the bill or he can veto the bill. I think one time in my 8 years here, we tried to override the veto and we didn't succeed. We didn't get enough votes. So normally if the governor vetoes the bill, it's dead. Our legislation, our bills, if you will, are good for 2 years. At the end of the 2-year time frame, all the bills die. They're all no good anymore. You have to come back in January of that 2-year session and reintroduce all your legislation that didn't pass. So the way they have it set up is I'm on a 2-year term, so anything I introduce this year or next year, up till November when I run for re-election. If I get it passed, that's good. If I don't, all those bills die in November, and when I get re-elected, I have to reintroduce that legislation. It's like that in both the House and the Senate. Okay, that's a quick overview. How about questions? Sure.
Excuse me, you are the state representative of Pennsylvania, and how is your relationship with the House of Representatives from Pennsylvania?
Good question. In Washington.
In Washington, yes.
That's a great question. Actually, it's very good. Congressman Holden, Tim Holden, is our congressman who sits in Washington, and he is a Democrat. I'm a Republican, so you would think that we don't get along or we don't talk. It's actually the opposite. I enjoy working with him, and he enjoys working with me, and we work together for the benefit of Pennsylvanians and for our district. So it's actually a very good relationship, and we try to at least talk about once every 2-3 months, and we'll get together at least twice a year. We'll actually just sit down, and I can talk to him about legislation that's in Washington and what I think we need, and he'll talk to me about maybe some stuff going on in the district. We particularly work close together on funding for education, for hospitals, and for roads and bridges. That was a good question. Sure.
Okay, so as the Honorable House Representative, did you always encounter scenarios where you have to make some hard choices? For example, if your voters have diverging views on a particular issue, how could you weigh their differences, and how could you walk through the tightrope and make the final decision? Because obviously you can't please everybody.
Yeah. Well, I always try to remind my customers that much like being married, I don't always agree with my wife, but I'm still married. I'm hopeful that just because they don't always agree with me on every issue, that they'll still respect the fact that I'm their state representative and support me. It is always tough when you have a large group of your customers, constituents who don't support an issue, and you have to try to balance that from the people you don't hear from. Because in our business, you hear from all the people who are vocal on that issue, but that might be 50 people or 100 people, and you have to remember you represent 65,000 people. So are the ones that aren't calling you complaining, are they happy, or do they just not care? There are no easy votes. There's no doubt about that. It's always tough to try to vote for your district. In my 8 years here, I've actually voted at least 3 or 4 times how I thought the district really wanted me to vote versus how I might have felt personally in my heart. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I was a yes in my heart, but I voted no because I had heard from the district, or vice versa. So I'd like to think when I'm up here, I'm not voting for John Payne. I'm voting for the people that I represent. And you try sometimes to do the best job you can and hope that you're voting for the majority of your people. Good question. Sure.
I have one question. What's the difference of resolution and bill? And have there been any bills or resolutions about a foreign country or foreign affairs?
Good question. Resolutions are non-binding, not legal as far as law. I mean, we'll pass a resolution proclaiming this month Cancer Awareness Month, or naming the state, something that's going on for a group or an organization within the state. We pass them, only the House. The Senate doesn't pass them. So we have the right to do that, to name this month as EMS Week, Emergency Medical Services Week. We can do that. The Senate does their own versions and their own resolutions. We also pass resolutions that we want to send to Washington, to our congresspeople or to our senators, saying we would like you to support this or not support this. Again, it's not binding on them. It's only our request. We're requesting that they do this. When we pass a bill or legislation and it passes the Senate and it goes to the governor and is signed into law, that's now law. You have to abide by that. So the biggest difference is a bill or a piece of legislation can become law and it is enforceable, whereas a resolution is something that we'd like people to respect. Like if you don't want to recognize this week as Fire Prevention Week or EMS Week or Cancer Awareness Month, you're not going to get arrested. You're not going to get in trouble because you didn't do it. Whereas if we pass legislation that says this and you don't do it, it's enforceable. Okay?
Just now you introduced that the bill is only effective for 2 years, and after that the bill should be overviewed and be passed again. And I think most of the bills will be passed through after 2 years. Do you think it's kind of bureaucracy? The bill should be reviewed and only effective for 2 years, and kind of waste of time, energy, and even money.
Yeah. The way it's set up, because we're elected to 2-year terms, that if your legislation isn't passed in those 2 years, they don't want it to stay here because you may lose the election. And some new person may come in and say, I don't like that legislation. In fact, I was in the opposite side of that issue. He was going to vote for it, I was a no vote, and I won the election. So therefore, all that legislation does die for that reason. If you do get reelected, you can reintroduce that legislation in the new term, in the new 2-year term. And while it seems like that's very time-consuming and it wastes a lot of energies, the whole purpose is that if the bill had any merit, if it had some success to it, then the bill should have moved. It should have moved along and become law. If it didn't, then maybe you need to go and sit down with your colleagues and negotiate on that piece of legislation to get it to move. Many members up here will introduce a bill and they don't want the bill touched. As they wrote the bill, that's the way the bill should be passed. That's not the way you get legislation passed, at least in Pennsylvania, and pretty much in Washington too. If you have an idea or you have an idea and I say, yeah, that's pretty much in the same vein as my bill, I'm willing to amend my bill, will you support it now? And you say yes, that's how you pick up support for legislation. You try to incorporate other ideas that might benefit other people into that bill. Now, if you find a bill that does everything, it helps all of Pennsylvania, then you're going to get that bill passed.
Can you explain a little bit how do you split your time here and in the Hershey?
Okay.
For example, whether you stay 3 days here, 3 days here, or something.
When we're in session, we're traditionally here Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. We're here in Harrisburg. And then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we're back in our districts. That's normal, a normal session week. Right now, we're not in session for 3 weeks because they're doing budget hearings. So unless you're on the Appropriations Committee, and I'm not, members don't come into the Capitol for those 3 weeks. They spend all that time back in their districts. Next week, when we come back in session, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, all the members will be here. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you'll be back in your district. That happens all the way up to the last 2 weeks before we pass a budget. And traditionally, the 2 weeks before the budget deadline, we have to have a budget passed by June 30th. The last 2 weeks, we could be here 7 days both weeks, forcing us to get the job done, to get the budget passed. A gentleman who I took his place, he retired. I just saw him in the last week. We had dinner together, and he said, the biggest thing about not being a state representative is 2 things. I get my Saturdays and Sundays back to spend with my family, and I know what my schedule is. I know when I'm coming home. Being a member, you don't know when you come up here on a session day. Session starts at 11 in the morning. I don't know if I'm going to get home at 7 that night, 8 that night, 10 that night. So whenever the Speaker of the House says session's over, that's when I go home. Likewise, Saturday and I keep Sunday morning open for me to go, my wife and I to go to church, but Sunday afternoon could be an Eagle Scout Award, it could be a fire company banquet, it could be some other civic thing going on in one of the 7 communities I represent. So I'm available basically 7 days a week to go to some event somewhere in the district. That's all the time we have for this month's program. I'm State Representative John Payne. If you need assistance with any state government matter, feel free to contact my local office. That information will appear on your screen in a moment. Thanks for watching, and please join me next time for a Legislative Report.